Can you help me with this?" I looked up from the laundry I was folding to see Ethan standing in the doorway of the living room, holding a navy blue tie in his hand. His shirt was neatly pressed, the sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal his forearms, and his hair was still damp from the shower. "I've got an interview tomorrow," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not great with ties. I figured you might know how to do it." There was nothing unusual about the request. Over the years, Ethan had come to me for everything from life advice to help with his taxes. But this felt different. Perhaps it was the way he stood there, the slight uncertainty in his posture, or the way he was looking at me, not as a boy asking for help, but as a man. "Of course," I said, setting the laundry aside. "Come here." He stepped closer, and I reached for the tie, pulling it over his head and adjusting it so it sat flat against his chest. Standing this close to him, I couldn't help but notice the faint scent of his cologne, clean and woodsy, the kind that lingered long after he'd left a room. "Hold still," I murmured, sliding the fabric through my fingers as I began to loop the tie into a proper knot. His height forced me to tilt my head up slightly, and as I worked, I felt his breath, warm and steady, brushing against my face. My fingers faltered for just a moment, the intimacy of the moment catching me off guard. "There," I said quickly, stepping back and smoothing the tie against his chest. "All set?" Ethan looked down, adjusting the knot slightly before meeting my eyes. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft. For a moment, neither of us moved. His gaze lingered, and the air between us felt heavier than it should have. I cleared my throat, stepping back further. "You'll do great tomorrow," I said, my tone brisk. His lips curved into a small smile, the kind that felt warm and knowing all at once. "I hope so. I've got you to thank for making me look presentable." I forced a laugh, waving him off as he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. But as the sound of his truck faded down the street, I found myself standing in the quiet house, my heart beating faster than it had in years. When Ethan first came into my life, he was just a boy. 11 years old, shy and uncertain, still reeling from the divorce that had fractured his family. I had done my best to be patient, to give him the space he needed to adjust to the idea of me as his father's new wife. Over time, we found our rhythm. He grew up, went to college, and started a life of his own. And though his father was no longer here to see the man he'd become, I had always tried to keep that connection alive. Ethan still visited often, stopping by to help with chores or to check in on me. I wasn't a young woman anymore. I had lived enough life to know that love, no matter how deep or true, didn't exist in a vacuum. It was shaped by the world around it, by the expectations and judgments of others, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face that. The sound of Ethan's truck pulling into the driveway broke through my thoughts. My chest tightened as I watched him step out, his tall frame backlit by the morning sun. He knocked softly on the door before letting himself in, his smile warm but cautious. "Morning," he said, holding up a paper bag. "I brought breakfast." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "I wanted to," he replied simply, setting the bag on the counter. As he unpacked the food, I stood in the doorway watching him. He moved with the kind of ease that made it hard to believe anything had changed. But it had. When he turned and caught me staring, his smile faltered slightly. "You're overthinking again," he said gently. I let out a shaky laugh, folding my arms across my chest. "How can I not?" He stepped closer, his expression soft but resolute. "Because it's just us, no one else. None of that other stuff matters unless we let it." I looked away, my eyes falling to the floor. "It's not that simple, Ethan. You know it's not." "I know," he said, reaching out to tilt my chin up so I had to meet his gaze. "But I also know that what we have is real. And I'm not gonna let fear take that away from us." His words were steady, unyielding, and they wrapped around me like a lifeline. We sat at the table, the breakfast he'd brought mostly untouched between us. The conversation was quieter now, but no less significant. "I don't want to lose this," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You won't," I replied, my voice trembling. "But I don't know how to make this work. I don't know if I can be what you need." "You already are," he said simply, his hand covering mine. I stared at our hands, his larger and steadier than mine, and felt the weight of his conviction. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said softly. "But you don't have to be." Not with me. After breakfast, we moved to the porch, the late summer breeze carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. We sat in silence for a while, the quiet between us no longer heavy but comforting, like a blanket wrapped around old wounds. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. "What about?" "About feeling stuck here. About how this house feels heavy sometimes." I nodded, my chest tightening. "It does, but it's all I've known for so long. It's hard to imagine anything else." "Then maybe it's time for something new," he said, turning to look at me. "For both of us." I blinked, startled by the suggestion. "What do you mean?" "I mean, let's go somewhere else. Start fresh. Somewhere we don't have to worry about what people think or what they'll say. Just you and me." His words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. "Ethan, I don't know if I can just leave," I said, my voice trembling. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "But think about it. Really think about it, because I'll go anywhere as long as it's with you." That night, after he left, I sat by the window, staring out at the darkened yard. His words echoed in my mind, filling the quiet house with their weight. I thought about the life I had built here, the memories that filled every corner of this house. But I also thought about the life I could build with him, a life that felt alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, the path ahead uncertain but no longer empty. I didn't know what choice I would make. But as I sat there, the memory of his smile lingering in my mind, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But lately, those visits had felt different. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, though that had changed too. It was the way his presence filled the house, the way he seemed to linger just a little longer, as if neither of us wanted to say goodbye. That night, as I lay in bed, the memory of his smile lingered in my mind. It wasn't just the smile itself, it was the way it had made me feel. Warm. Seen. I told myself it was nothing. A fleeting moment. A trick of my imagination brought on by loneliness. After all, it had been 5 years since Bill passed, and the ache of his absence had settled into a dull, constant hum in my chest. I had built a life around that ache, filling my days with gardening, reading, and the occasional lunch with friends. But the nights were harder. The silence stretched longer, the emptiness of the house more pronounced. Ethan's visits had become a reprieve from that silence, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. But tonight, as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been leaning on him too much. The next morning, I found myself glancing at the clock more often than I cared to admit, wondering how his interview was going. When my phone buzzed just after noon, I picked it up quickly, my heart skipping a beat at the sight of his name. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey," he replied, the sound of his smile evident even through the phone. "Just finished. I think it went well." "That's great," I said, genuinely relieved. "I told you you'd do fine." "Well, I had a good luck charm," he said, his tone teasing. "Thanks again for the tie." My chest tightened, the warmth of his words catching me off guard. "Anytime," I said softly. There was a pause, just long enough to feel significant, before he spoke again. "I was thinking of stopping by later. Would that be okay?" "Of course," I replied, too quickly. When the call ended, I sat with the phone still in my hand, the quiet house around me suddenly feeling a little less empty. Ethan arrived that evening with his usual easygoing energy, a grin spreading across his face as he walked through the door. "Got the job," he said simply, holding up a bottle of wine like a trophy. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely thrilled for him. "Come in, tell me everything." He followed me into the kitchen, where I'd already started dinner, a habit I hadn't even realized I'd fallen into until recently. Whenever he mentioned stopping by, I found myself automatically preparing something to share, as if his presence had become part of my routine. As I stirred the pot of soup, Ethan leaned against the counter, recounting the details of the interview. His voice was animated, his gestures larger than life, and I couldn't help but smile at the way he lit up when he talked about his plans for the future. "I owe you, you know," he said suddenly, his tone softening. "For what?" I asked, glancing at him over my shoulder. "For always being in my corner," he replied, his gaze steady. "For believing in me even when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. That's what family does, I said finally, my words feeling both true and inadequate. Not everyone would, though, he said, his eyes lingering on mine. Not like you have. I turned back to the stove, my chest tightening in a way I couldn't quite explain. We ate dinner in the living room, the coffee table serving as an impromptu dining space. The wine he'd brought was rich and warm, and it loosened the conversation into something lighter, more intimate. He told me stories from his college days, moments that made me laugh so hard I had to set my glass down for fear of spilling it. And then, slowly, the story shifted. He started asking me questions about my life, my dreams, the things I'd wanted to do before life had taken its own course. Did you ever think about traveling? He asked, leaning back against the couch. All the time, I admitted, swirling the wine in my glass. Bill and I used to talk about taking a trip to Italy. He wanted to see Rome, and I wanted to see Tuscany. But, well, life got in the way. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. You should still go, he said. It's not too late. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Maybe one day? One day? He echoed, his gaze lingering on me in a way that made my heart flutter. After dinner, we moved to the kitchen to clean up. It had become a kind of ritual. He'd wash and I'd dry, our movements synchronized in a way that felt effortless. As I reached for a dish towel, our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver up my arm. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and when I glanced at him, I found his eyes already on me. Sorry, he said softly, pulling his hand back, but there was something in his voice, something unspoken, that made the air between us feel heavier. It's fine, I replied quickly, focusing on the plate in my hands. But it wasn't fine. Not really. The next few visits were much the same. He'd come over with some excuse, helping me fix a loose step on the porch, bringing over leftovers from a barbecue, or just stopping by to chat. And each time, the moments between us seemed to stretch, filled with an unspoken tension I couldn't quite define. One afternoon, I caught myself watching him as he worked on the garden gate. The sun was shining, casting a golden glow over everything, and he'd taken off his jacket, rolling up his sleeves as he worked. He paused to wipe the sweat from his forehead, and as he turned, he caught me looking. Something wrong? He asked, a teasing smile playing on his lips. No, I said quickly, turning back to the flowers I was pretending to weed. Just making sure you're doing it right. He laughed, the sound warm and rich, and I felt my cheeks flush. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I found myself thinking about him again. It wasn't just his presence that lingered. It was the way he made the house feel less empty, the way he brought life back into the spaces that had felt so hollow for so long. But it was more than that, too. It was the way his smile seemed meant for me, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the way he looked at me like I was someone worth noticing. I told myself it was just the loneliness talking, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. The next time Ethan came over, it was to fix the gutters. At least, that's what he said when he called that morning. It's supposed to rain later this week, he said casually. Figured I'd save you the trouble of dealing with clogged gutters. Always looking out for me, I teased lightly, but my chest tightened with warmth. By the time he arrived, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows over the yard. I watched from the living room window as he set up the ladder, his movements purposeful and sure. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, his sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing his strong forearms. I told myself to focus on something else, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, the quiet confidence in his posture. At one point, he looked over his shoulder and caught me watching. He grinned, a teasing glint in his eye, and called out, "He's supervising, or just admiring my handiwork?" Flustered, I stepped back from the window, muttering under my breath about busybodies before retreating to the kitchen. When he came inside a little while later, he was sweaty and disheveled but smiling. "All done," he announced, wiping his hands on a towel I handed him. "Thank you," I said, feeling a little breathless under the weight of his smile. "It's no problem," he replied, leaning against the counter. "I like helping out." There was a pause, one of those moments where the air between us seemed to hum with something unspoken. I busied myself with pouring him a glass of water, hoping he couldn't see the way my hands trembled. "I'm glad you let me stick around," he said suddenly, his voice quieter now. I looked up, startled. "Why wouldn't I?" He shrugged, his gaze steady. "I don't know. Maybe you think I'm here too much, like I don't have my own life." "That's ridiculous," I said, my voice firm. "You're always welcome here, Ethan, you know that?" His lips curved into a small smile, and for a moment he just looked at me, his eyes holding mine in a way that made my chest tighten. "Thanks," he said softly. That evening, he stayed for dinner. We settled into the routine we'd developed over the past few months. Me cooking, while he helped with the small tasks, the conversation easy and full of laughter. But there was something different about tonight, something quieter and more intense. It wasn't just the way he leaned closer when we talked, or the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me the pepper grinder. It was the way his presence filled the space around me, warm and steady, making me feel like I wasn't just existing but living again. After dinner, we moved to the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. I poured us each a glass of wine, and we settled onto the couch, sitting just close enough that our knees almost touched. He told me about his week, his voice calm but animated, as he recounted a story about a coworker's mishap with a vending machine. I laughed, the sound spilling out of me more freely than it had in years. But as the conversation drifted into quieter territory, the space between us seemed to shrink. "I don't think I've ever seen you laugh like that," he said suddenly, his tone soft. I tilted my head, surprised. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his gaze warm and intent. "I mean, you always laugh, but tonight it felt different, happier." His words made my breath catch, and I looked away, focusing on the wine glass in my hands. "Maybe it's just the wine," I said lightly, though my voice betrayed me with its tremor. "It's not," he said, his voice so quiet it barely reached me. I turned back to him, and the intensity in his eyes made my pulse quicken. The next time he came over, it was late afternoon. I had been out in the garden, pulling weeds, and he found me there, his shadow falling over me as he stepped onto the grass. "Need a hand?" he asked. Crouching down beside me, I looked up, brushing dirt from my gloves. "I think I've got it, but thanks." He stayed anyway, picking up the stray clippings and placing them into the basket beside me. For a while we worked in silence, the quiet hum of the summer evening wrapping around us. But eventually, the silence broke. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" he asked, his voice careful, almost hesitant. I glanced at him, startled by the question. "Why would I?" He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the basket of clippings. "I don't know, it's just, this house is so full of memories. Good ones, I'm sure, but doesn't it ever feel heavy?" His words settled over me, heavy with meaning. I set my gloves down, my hands suddenly still. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quiet. "But it's my home. It's all I have left of Bill." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That makes sense." For a moment neither of us spoke, but then he looked at me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "But you're more than that, you know, more than just his wife, you're you." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "I don't know who that is anymore," I said, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "I think I do," he said softly. That night, as I lay in bed, his words echoed in my mind. The way he looked at me, the quiet conviction in his voice, it was like he saw something in me I didn't even see in myself. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe I could. The evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles after a long, warm day. I had been sitting on the porch, a book in my lap and a glass of iced tea sweating on the small table beside me, when I heard Ethan's truck pull into the driveway. I wasn't expecting him, but by now, his unannounced visits felt like second nature. My heart skipped a beat at the sound, and I quickly reminded myself to breathe. When he appeared at the bottom of the porch steps, his smile was warm but hesitant, like he was testing the waters. He held up a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout. "Thought you might be hungry." I smiled back, standing to let him in. "You've got good timing. I didn't feel like cooking tonight." We settled in the kitchen, unpacking the food and pouring the wine. The conversation flowed easily, like it always did. He told me about his day, about a coworker who had mistakenly sent an email meant for his boss to the entire office, and I laughed, the sound breaking through the quiet of the house. But as the meal went on, the laughter faded, replaced by something quieter, heavier. "I like this," he said suddenly, his voice softer now. "Like what?" I asked, glancing at him. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Being here. With you." His words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten. "I like it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. After dinner we moved to the living room. I poured us another glass of wine, and we sat on the couch, the room lit only by the soft glow of the lamp. The silence between us felt heavier than before, like there was something neither of us wanted to say but couldn't avoid any longer. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, the glass of wine cradled in his hands. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course," I replied, though my heart began to race. "Why do you always hold back?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with something I couldn't quite place. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, every time we're together, it feels like there's something, but you always pull away." His words sent a jolt through me, and I felt my breath catch. "Ethan, I don't think." He turned to face me, cutting me off with a quiet but firm, "Just tell me I'm wrong." I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I opened my mouth, but all I could do was stare at him, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and longing. He set his glass down on the coffee table and shifted closer, his knee brushing against mine. "I'm not trying to make this harder for you," he said softly, "but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." "Ethan," I began, my voice trembling. "We can't." "Why not?" he asked, his gaze steady. "Because it's complicated? Because people wouldn't understand?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "Because it's wrong. Because it's not what we're supposed to do." "Who decides that?" he asked, his voice rising slightly before softening again. "Who gets to tell us what's right and what's wrong?" I didn't have an answer. Before I could say anything else, he reached out, his hand covering mine. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice so quiet it barely reached me. "I'm not afraid," I lied, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. "You are," he said gently, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "But I'll wait. As long as you need." His words broke something inside me, and I felt the first tear slide down my cheek. He reached up, his thumb catching it before it could fall further. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I know," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "I know." When his lips met mine, it was soft at first, almost tentative, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The kiss deepened, and everything else fell away. The doubts, the fears, the voices in my head telling me to stop. All that mattered was the way his hands felt on my skin, the way he held me like I was something fragile but unbreakable all at once. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You're not going to," I replied, the words spilling out before I could stop them. We sat there for a long time, our hands intertwined, the silence between us filled with a sense of inevitability. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was Kim, and the way he made me feel alive again. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and unspoken truths. Ethan came by more often, always with an excuse, a light bulb that needed replacing, a leaky faucet, or just a casual drop-in to check on me. But every visit carried an unspoken weight, a tension that hung in the air even as we laughed and talked like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. One evening, after dinner, we sat on the porch, the fading light painting the horizon in soft hues of pink and orange. Ethan leaned back in the chair beside me, his long legs stretched out in front of him, his beer resting on the arm of the chair. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. I shrugged, swirling the wine in my glass. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About us," I said before I could stop myself. His posture straightened slightly, his gaze sharpening. "What about us?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the stem of the glass. "I don't know if we're doing the right thing, Ethan. I don't know if we can work." He turned to face me fully, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" Because it's complicated, I said, my voice trembling. Because it's not just about us. People wouldn't understand. They'd judge us. And I'm not sure I can handle that. Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes searching mine. Do you care what they think? He asked softly. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Did I care? Of course, I did. But not as much as I cared about him. I care about you, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Then that's all that matters, he said, leaning forward. It's just you and me, no one else. Let them think what they want. They don't know us. They don't know what this is. His words settled over me, warm and reassuring, but they didn't chase away the lingering doubts. What if we're wrong? I asked, my voice trembling. What if we're making a mistake? Ethan reached out, his hand covering mine. Then it's our mistake to make, he said simply. That night, the air was heavy with unspoken emotions as we moved back inside. I cleared the dishes from dinner while Ethan lingered in the living room, his presence a constant hum in the back of my mind. When I finally joined him, he was standing by the window, staring out into the darkened yard. The soft glow of the lamp cast shadows across his face, highlighting the quiet intensity in his expression. Ethan, I said softly, drawing his attention. He turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that made my heart ache. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice raw. Every time I leave, all I want to do is come back. His confession left me breathless, my chest tightening as the weight of his words settled over me. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Say you feel the same, he said, stepping closer. Say you want this as much as I do. I do, I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. But I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of what this means, of what could happen if we cross that line. He reached out, his hand settling gently on my arms. We already crossed it, he said softly. And I don't regret it, not for a second. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I stared up at him, the conflict inside me threatening to overwhelm me. But then he cupped my face in his hands, his touch steady and grounding, and everything else faded away. It's okay to be scared, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But you don't have to face this alone. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. When he kissed me, it wasn't hesitant or tentative. It was full of all the things we hadn't said, all the emotions we'd been holding back. His lips were warm and firm against mine, and I felt myself melting into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as he pulled me closer. The world outside disappeared, leaving only the sound of our breaths and the pounding of my heart. His hands slid to my waist, steady and sure, as he guided me toward the couch. When we sank onto the cushions, he hovered over me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. I reached up, tangling my fingers in his hair, and pulled him back down, losing myself in the warmth of his touch. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word felt like a revelation. For the first time in years, I felt alive, truly, deeply alive. His hands explored me with a reverence that made my heart ache, his touch gentle yet insistent, as if he was memorizing every inch of me. And I let him, surrendering to the moment, to the emotions I had spent so long trying to suppress. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over us. His arm was draped over my waist, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. Are you okay? He asked quietly, his voice low and soothing. I nodded, my head resting against his chest. I think so, I said, my voice barely audible. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his hold on me tightening. I meant what I said, he murmured. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't respond, my mind too full of emotions I couldn't yet untangle. When he finally left, the house felt both emptier and fuller all at once. I sat on the couch long after he was gone, the memory of his touch still lingering on my skin. I knew we'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of what that meant was almost suffocating. But beneath the fear and the doubt, there was something else: hope. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new, something terrifying but full of possibility. And for now, that was enough. The morning after, I sat by the window, cradling a cup of coffee in my hands, as the early sunlight poured through the glass. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator, but my thoughts were anything but still. Ethan had left just before dawn, his touch lingering on my skin, his words still echoing in my mind. I'm not going anywhere. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the warmth of his promise, to let myself imagine a world where we could exist without judgment or consequence. But as the sunlight crept further into the room, so did the doubts, creeping into the edges of my thoughts like shadows I couldn't escape.